All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Rockpile Museum for our special presentation from archaeologists Drs. John and Dr. Mavis Greer. And this archaeological presentation on Wyoming Rock Art goes along with our traveling exhibition, our exhibit that we've got up until June 3rd. And we would like to give a special thanks to the Wyoming Archaeological Society, specifically the Pumpkin Buttes chapter, for helping host this, along with the Fort Caspar Museum for helping put the exhibit together. So my name is Justin Horan. I'm the museum assistant here in charge of collections and exhibits. So relatively new if you guys haven't seen me around. And so yeah, I'd like to give the special welcome to Dr. John and Mavis Greer. And then we've also got flyers in the back with all of our upcoming events throughout this summer. We've got a lot going on at the museum. So definitely grab one of those to see what we've all got going on at the museum the rest of this summer. And with that, I'll turn it over to Drs. John and Mavis Greer.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for coming. For those of you who have had a chance to look at this exhibit, you'll realize that there are lots of little things in there about what's a pictograph, what's a petroglyph, and other little definitions, things that I'm not going to repeat here tonight. Also, you probably noticed that it's arranged by topic, and so as to not be too redundant with the exhibit, I'm going to look at rock art from a regional perspective tonight. Starting with this site, which you can see has had a lot of human graffiti. It is located southwest of Laramie, and it shows what happens to sites when people don't have any knowledge about historic resources. They need to be taught that historic remains are important not only to the people who made them or to their direct descendants, but to those of us who are the regional descendants of those remains, those of us that live in Wyoming today. I'm going to start close to this area with the rock art in the Black Hills and the Powder River Basin, both of which extend across the state lines, of course, into Montana and South Dakota, since rock art knew no state boundaries. These are the sites that I'm going to feature in this talk. Starting with the Black Hills, this is the Arch Creek site. It's located in the northwestern part of the hills in Wyoming. There are grooves in this really small slit here. Here's Alice Tradovitz, the BLM Newcastle archaeologist, and John standing in there. So you can see how narrow that slit really is. It's full of petroglyphs. All of these petroglyphs were made with a groove technique. The majority of them are human stick figures. There are also some bird tracks here. And all of them have some association with arrows. Some of them have arrows that are just pointing to them. I'm not sure I can see it from this angle, but some of them have arrows all the way through them, like this one for sure I can see, and others are just holding arrows. Now, groove rock art occurs across the world, really, and in Wyoming, you see it in several areas, but it's especially concentrated in this part of the Black Hills, in the southeastern part of the state, in the southwestern part of the state around Rock Springs, and also in the Bighorn Mountains. This is Whoop-Up. Probably several of you have visited this site. It's one of the premier sites in the southwestern part of the hills, just out of Newcastle. This site has a long history of study. In the 1980s, Linnea Sundstrom used it for her dissertation. Now, she had a close connection with this site because her grandfather was a carpenter, contractor. He helped build houses in this area. And while he was working for somebody in the region, they sent him to Whoop-Up to get sandstone for a construction project. Well, he got into the canyon and he saw the petroglyphs and he realized how important they were, so he went back to his boss and said, the sandstone in Whoop-Up is just not appropriate for what we're doing. So luckily, they went out and found another source. So he was definitely one of the early conservationists for rock art in the state. Now, by the 1990s, Alice Tradebus took up the reins of studying Whoop-Up, and she did one of the first major dating projects in the state, where she did samples from the rock art and had them directly dated through radiocarbon. This is one of the figures that she had dated. You can see it's a really well done elk with considerable deposition over the top, and it dated about 11,000 years ago. Those of you who know the chronology of this region know that that was an early Paleo-Indian figure. This site, some of you may have visited it also. It's northwest of Gillette. We call it the Daily Petroglyphs. There are two main panels here, this being one of them. I noticed in the museum just a little while ago that this particular figure is on display in there. These three guys are almost life-size. This one has a small shield telling us the relative date of this site. Since shields came into this area as large body covering protective area, they were protecting the entire body, and they decreased in size with the coming of the horse so that they became just a small spiritual protection that could be used while riding. So we know this came after 1700 AD when the horse was in this area. This person has a quiver of arrows on his back. He also has a bone bead breastplate. Now these breastplates were pretty common in the whole area, and a lot of people used them in their clothing. They were known for their spiritual powers. They not only protected the person during battle, but they also protected them during hunting. Now, he is carrying a severed head. There are very few severed heads in the rock art of the Northwestern Plains. However, there is another one that's fairly close by at Hewlett. But by and large, most severed heads occur in the American Southwest. One of the things that you see throughout the Powder River Basin is a close connection between humans and bears in the rock art. And you can see that here, these people who still have their feet intact have toes that are like bear claws. Now over on this panel, there are three names with dates. The dates are early, 1839, 1847, 1842. It is unlikely that these names were put here at the time that the dates signify. These dates are in quotes, so they might represent when these three particular people first visited the site and then came back later, or someone else came back later and commemorated their visit by putting these dates up here. Maybe they were their birth dates. The story as to what the association is between these dates and these people has been lost. The names, though, are probably Crow, having checked them out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this whole site was made by the Crow. At this time, we had the Crow, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and various groups of the Sioux in the area. And as a matter of fact, one of the more interesting stories that could be associated with this site is in Red Cloud's autobiography. He talks about moving from Fort Phil Kearny, where he was engaged in the battle, to his winter place of residence, which was on the Little Missouri River. And how he got from Fort Phil Kearny to the Little Missouri River would have taken him close by this site, if not right at the site. Now this is moving into the southwestern part of the Powder River Basin. This is the Dangling Lake site. It's not too far north of Casper. Again, we see the connection of bear and humans. This human has bear claw toes, and he's standing on top of a bear. This guy has a very distinctive scar across his face. There are several representations of scar face in the rock art of the Northern Plains. But I only know of one really good ethnographic account of Scarface, and that is with the Blackfeet. Now, the Blackfeet homeland is quite far north, but we know from ethnohistoric documents that they did come all the way down to the North Platte River for different raiding parties that were involved with other groups down here, and also for trade. Well, the Scarface story associated with the Blackfeet says that Scarface brought down to earth knowledge about how to use the forked sticks and how to use sweetgrass. But most importantly, he brought to earth the sweat lodge. He brought it from the sun. And so every year, to commemorate the fact that he brought the sweat lodge to earth, the Blackfeet build one in his honor at the annual Sundance. Now, this well pad was constructed long after this site was known. We're not exactly sure why it was placed so close, because there is a BLM ordinance to keep a quarter of a mile from any known rock art site. But this well turned out to be a dry hole. This well pad is now rehabilitated back to its natural contours, and there was no impact to the site from either the drilling rig or any of the people that worked on it. Here's a close-up of a couple of figures from Dangling Legs. This is how it got its name. This block has fallen off. The legs are disconnected from the rest of the body. John's holding it up here where it would have been naturally. This was not vandalism. This was just natural deterioration. Now, at this site, there are several of these V-necked figures. This one I've enhanced a bit so that you can see it better. It is in the correct relative position to this Dangling Legs figure. Now, V-neck figures are a common way of portraying humans from northern Alberta all the way through Wyoming. You get them not only as petroglyphs, but as pictographs. And a few years back, Larry Londorf got involved in direct dating some V-necked figures. He dated one from Little Canyon Creek site, which is in the Bighorn Basin, and then he dated two from central Montana, close to Great Falls. These three figures that were dated were all made with charcoal, so they were easily radiocarbon dated. The Little Canyon Creek one dated to AD 1400, those in central Montana, AD 700 and 1300. These dates are not that unexpected based on other evidence for when these were made. It was thought for many years that the V-necked figure originated in the north and then it moved south, and that seems to confirm it. Now, this is in the southeastern part of the Powder River Basin. This is Pinnacle Rocks. Pinnacle Rocks is one of only two sites in the Powder River Basin, in the Wyoming portion of the Powder River Basin, I should clarify, where you have horse figures. And it's also one of only two other sites that have horse tracks. Considering that the Powder River Basin was such a hotspot for mounted warriors from the time the horse arrived in the area up to reservation times, it's really perplexing as to why there are not more horse figures in the Powder River Basin, especially when you consider what tribes were there. They made horses in other areas, not only in rock art, but in robe art and in ledger art. We have no plausible explanation as to why they didn't do it in this area. Now, here are some of the figures at Pinnacle Rocks, and of course I want to show you the horses. This is an armored horse, one of only about 20 known armored horses on the northern plains. And you can see that it's one of the earlier horses that was placed on the wall because it's being pursued by a pedestrian warrior, where we have the whole full body shield. And as I mentioned, once the horse came around, they were pretty quickly decreasing in size to be something pretty small. Now, this is a much later horse. He has a saddle. There are two little V's right here showing that, indicating that saddle. He's also really well done, and as time went by, the horses became more and more detailed. Now, a few years back, Jim Kaiser decided he was going to develop a formula for being able to tell who made this horse as far as what ethnic group. And he looked at things like the angle of the neck and whether the head was pointed down or up and characteristics like that. So we applied his formula to this particular horse. And the one that it looks most closely like is the Blackfeet again. So if this really was made by a Blackfeet, it was the farthest southeast that we know of a Blackfoot figure. Now there are lots of shield figures at this site, including this one, which is also in the display here because it has an antelope on it. And you would think that with the number of antelope in the plains that we would have a lot of rock art with antelope, almost none. So this is really an unusual shield decoration. Now up here, these two shield bearing warriors have their weapons right next to them here, but they both have lines coming out of their mouth connecting to the mouth of a bear. These are known throughout the world as speech scrolls. However, this is the only place we know of where the speech of the shield-bearing warrior is connected to the bear. But it's not unusual to think of such a figure being in the Powder River Basin because of the connection between bears and humans. Okay, moving to southeastern Wyoming, I'm going to feature 3 sites that have quite different styles. But before I get into those, I want to show you about one other medium that rock art symbols occur on that we don't usually think of, and that's trees. Now, this picture is actually from Park County. The reason I'm using it is I don't have any picture of rock art on trees in southeastern Wyoming. But what I do have in southeastern Wyoming is a historical document that talks about Native American rock art on trees in this area. So that's why I want to use it here. This document was written by Francis Parkman in 1846. He was traveling on the Little Laramie River with a group of Oglala Sioux. And this is what he recorded. He says, several Crow war parties were known to be in the vicinity, and one of them that passed here some time before had peeled the bark from a neighboring tree and engraved upon it the white wood certain hieroglyphics to signify that they had invaded the territories of their enemies, the Dakota, and set them at defiance. Well, in actuality, he was probably invaded by the Lakota, not the Dakota, because that with the D, that group of Sioux are in eastern North Dakota, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, whereas the Lakota with the L are down here. However, it's hard to hear between a D and an L, and in 1846, he probably didn't know how to spell anyway. So. Okay, Register Cliff. I'm sure most of you have been to Register Cliff. This is at the northern end of the area that's open to visitation. It's where they haven't really kept up the trail all that well, although the fence is in really good shape to keep the people away from the wall. Now, where these people are standing right here, they're looking at a big red horse painted on the wall there. Here is a close-up of that horse and a D-Stretch computer enhancement of it. For those of you who don't know about D-Stretch, it's a computer enhancement program that was developed specifically for rock art. As painted rock art fades, it still remains on the wall. The paint is still there, we just can't see it. And this computer program can detect what that paint is, bring it out, and show us what the figure is, at least to a pretty good degree. What was painted here was a horse with a rider. And there are also a few other things over here, some short lines and all. Now, we checked with Jason Vulcan, who is a trail expert at the Trail Center in Casper, and asked him what he knew about this horse. And he said, well, during the trail era, Register Cliff was known by several different names, one of them which was Red Horse Cliff. And he said, because of this horse. Now, the story that has circulated with this horse there is that some soldiers at Fort Laramie painted this horse on the wall to use as target practice. Well, this horse, you can see, has been shot up considerably. That whether or not it was painted by soldiers is up for debate, because the style of that horse and the type of red paint suggests that it was a Native American horse that was probably there first, and then people came in and used it for target practice. This horse really deserves a study of the paint, and there are different ways of doing analysis of paint today that can tell you what comprises the paint, and you should be able to tell whether it was a modern paint or a paint that was based on Aboriginal recipes. This is a part of Register Cliff that is not open to the public. It has a lot of names and dates, just like the part that is. It also has a lot of Native American symbols that you can still see. Of course, the portion of Register Cliff that is now open and is really known for its names and dates also had a lot of Native American rock art on it previously, but mostly you can't see it anymore. These, however, are still very clear. They're two elk dreamers, and we know that they're elk dreamers because early ethnographers recorded a lot about them. They recorded not only drawings like Whistler here, this drawing of Whistler that he did in 1907, but there are also a few photos of it on clothing and other items. Now these are still in good shape because first off, they're located high on the wall. You can see Dave Reese and I are standing down here and it's way above our heads. And there's this little ledge that comes out here that helps protect them from the weather. Now, elk dreamers were like other figures in rock art, used by several different tribes, but the best known story about them is from the Lakota, and the Lakota probably did these just based on where they're located and the time that they were probably done. And the Lakotas said that the elk dreamer was a spiritual helper of theirs that they called upon when they wanted to transform into a supernatural being. Horned Owl Cave, we have several pictures of it in the exhibit, but it's such an unusual site that I wanted to use it. It's north of Laramie in the Laramie Range, and it is one really difficult hike to get up there. This photo was taken before we got to the cave, and if you can see right here are our vehicles, so you can see how small they are. However, once you get up there, you're rewarded with a really nice cave with that had a lot of archaeological deposits as well as rock art. This cave was originally excavated in the early 1960s, and it was published in American Antiquity in 1964. They focused primarily on the deposits, but they also talked about the rock art. The deposits dates, as you can see, I have down here that they ranged from AD 1000 to 1700, and this seems to be in line with the type of rock art that was put there also. Here's a close-up of some of the rock art. These red abstract designs are the earliest figures here. They're in line with the early figures across the Northern Plains. And then the latest figures are these shield-bearing warriors done in black. This is Talking Rocks. It's northeast of Medicine Bow. There are petroglyphs all along these sandstone outcroppings. This is a Google Earth look at the site with the 25 panels that John and I recorded during the pandemic. It's on a private ranch, and we felt very privileged to be able to go out there while everybody was incubating. It is dominated by grooves. But these grooves come in all shapes and sizes and actually configurations. There are shields made out of them. There are humans made out of them. There are abstract designs made out of them. One of the figures that I want to focus on from Talking Rocks is this shield-bearing warrior, because he is not like any others that you would see here or probably many other places. Here's a shield, and it's decorated with a bear and with a sun. Now, you would expect a bear, and bears occur on a lot of shields on the Northern Plains because of their power. You don't see that many sun symbols on shields. A few years back, Linnea Sundstrom and Jim Kaiser decided that they were going to do a study of all known shields. They looked at shields in museums and shields that were published, photographs and other things, see if they could figure out if certain shield designs were used by particular Indian tribes. One of the things that they did find in this is that the sun symbol was not something that a lot of people used. However, the Cheyenne liked that because it was a symbol of masculinity and it helped protect them. So a sun shield with a bear symbol, that seems like super protection. Next to this shield are two weapons. This is a long spear with a triangular point. When you get a point that looks like this in rock art, it's usually denoting a metal point. Next to it is a tomahawk or a war axe. It's a little deceptive here, but this axe is actually cut straight across right there. So we think it's probably a representation of a Missouri war axe. They were widely traded into this area. They were traded in prior to descendants of Europeans even coming in here. They made it here first. So there's another thing about this. These weapons have two lines on each side of them. Right here and right here. Those lines, when you see them in ledger art or robe art, other type of art, they're noting that the handles of these weapons were wrapped, usually with an otter skin. And that has also been found in rock art, but only far to the north for the Crow and the Blackfeet. However, even though this is farther south and we don't see it anywhere else, I doubt seriously either a Crow or a Blackfoot made this particular figure. This is in an area that's dominated by the Shoshone, Arapaho, and Ute, more likely based on the late date of this symbol with the metal point and with the war axe. It's one of those tribes. Okay, moving to southwestern Wyoming, there is a wide variety of sites in this area, lots of different styles. I'm just going to show you a few. This one, we do feature this particular figure in the exhibit. This is Upper Powder Spring. It's southwest of Baggs and it's just on the north side of the Colorado state line. The area is dominated by these little rock shelters. They're not much, but almost every single one of them has charcoal drawings. Most of them, which are not as nicely done as this one. This one was used on an archaeology t-shirt and other paraphernalia by the Wyoming Archaeological Society a few years back. And when Judy Wolf went in to pick it up from the printer, they wanted to charge her a copyright, thinking that she was using the Wyoming bucking horse. So she was able to convince them, though, that no, this one dated at least 200 years before the Wyoming bucking horse, so she didn't have to pay. Now, this area where all of this rock art is located in Upper Powder Springs has a large juniper corral. This corral has been known for a long time. It's been written up by several different people. The corral can still be recognized on the ground today. It's made with juniper branches. In some places, they're still stacked so that you know that at one point it was pretty high. The people that have written about it felt that it was made by the Ute. The purpose of it was to hold horses that they had stolen from one group, brought them here, held them for a while they were going to transport them somewhere else. So when this site was, all of these sites at Upper Powder Springs were written up, Kaiser determined that these sites were made by young men who were left at Upper Powder Spring to guard the horses in the corral, and they were bored, so they spent their time doing drawings just to pass the time. I'm not sure how accurate that is, although I do think that it's probably right that the Ute were the authors of these figures. This site is south of Rock Springs, the Sugarloaf petroglyphs. They are of a completely different time, style, and function from Upper Powder Springs. You can see here they're fully pecked animals, humans, abstracts. These animals also do not have any hoofs. Their feet just come down and end, indicating that these are much earlier than the animals at Upper Powder Springs, and these were probably made during the Archaic period. Now moving north of Rock Springs, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have been to this side, which I almost looked by too quickly here. White Mountain, it's open to the public, it's managed by the BLM. It has a wide variety of figures. They were made by a lot of different cultures. They have a lot of different time periods that they represent. This is one of the first figures you see as you come upon the site. It's a big elk with really gigantic rack. The elk itself is about 4 feet long. It's one of the first figures that was placed on the site. You can tell by how weathered it is and all, but it's still readily recognizable. These hands that have been grooved into the sandstone, you've probably seen on the internet. It's a popular figure to put on social media. I've seen it on various petroglyph sites online, and most people think it has to do with fertility. However, that's probably not the case. For one thing, worldwide and for a lot of years, people want to get the power of a sacred place. And once rock art's in an area, it becomes a sacred place. And they go in and they grind into the sandstone to get grains of sandstone that then they can take that power back with them. Now this, like I say, it happens worldwide. It also extended into modern religions. As a matter of fact, on the Wind River Reservation, there's an early Christian church there where the foundation was made out of sandstone blocks that were brought in there. And if you look at that today, you can see many grooves on those sandstone blocks where people did that very same thing. They gouged into the sandstone to get those grains to get the spiritual help and get part of the power that site has to offer. Now, both of these scenes show late biographic art. This is the type of rock art that was done after the coming of the horse, although there is an argument that it started right before the coming of the horse, where people are actually going out there writing memories of particular battles. This is one of a battle scene. They also do memories of captures. Right here you see this man on a horse capturing 2 women. Now, capturing of women has happened for hundreds of years among not only Northern Plains tribes, but a lot of other places in the world. But on the Northern Plains, it became extremely important after the early 1870s smallpox epidemic. There is quite a bit written about this, that after that epidemic went through, most people's populations were so decimated that they felt the only way that they were going to be able to get their particular tribe up and running again was to get women and children from other tribes. And there's a note particularly about the Blackfeet that said the warriors were told when they go out, if they had any children in that group that they encountered that were not yet trained in the bow and arrow, they were to bring them back with them. They figured if they hadn't been trained in the bow and arrow yet, they would have a better or easier time of indoctrinating them into their tribe. Okay, now we can see the Western Message petroglyph site. For those of you who don't know about Western Message petroglyphs, they are Native American symbols. They occur in lines, often 2 or sometimes 3. And then below that, there will be a signature. Usually it's a handprint like this one. And the hand will probably have some decoration in the palm. Now, there's only one Western Message petroglyph site in Wyoming, and this is it out of Green River. However, there are about 40 known in the Western United States. They all have these same symbols, although not every symbol occurs at every site. And furthermore, they don't always occur in the same order. So they'll be mixed up from one site to the other, sort of making you realize that there is a different message being portrayed each time. These sites have been known for quite some time. Not all of them, more and more have been found in recent years because people have been on a mission to find them. But they have had some very unusual interpretations. Some people say the Mormons made all of these. Now, granted, they were made after the coming of metal tools. They were not made with stone tools. But that doesn't mean that they weren't made before any people of European descent came in, since we know metal tools preceded them. Some people say they were made by well-educated, rich white men. And the reason they have those designations is they say they read books that told about Native American symbols. They read things like Mallory. So, you know, they had an idea of what should be placed on the wall. Now, John and I are not in favor of any of these interpretations. We are very much of the opinion that they were made by Native people. Now, if the person was not 100% Native of one tribe, maybe they were mixed European, Native American, they were probably still raised in the Native culture. They understood what these symbols meant and what order they were to place them. For one thing, these sites are placed all in really hard to reach places, exactly where you would expect to find a Native American vision quest. Someplace where people were going to say, sing songs or say prayers to the supernatural. Here's these are two people hiking here. This is the first one, and this is the second one here. And let me tell you, those are steep climbs. And this is not the worst one of where you find Western message petroglyphs. Anyway, we're really interested in this topic. We would really like to find more of these sites in Wyoming. If anybody has heard of one, we would love to talk to you about it. Okay, moving to Northwestern Wyoming. This is an area, again, of very diverse styles of rock art. And some of the most famous rock art in Wyoming occurs here, the Dinwoody style. If you're anywhere in the world and you're with a group of rock art people and you tell them you're from Wyoming, they all know Dinwoody. So it is something that is found on the web, and numerous books have been written about it. However, I'm not going to start showing you a Dinwoody style rock art site, because I'm going to start with the Grable South site, which is along the Little Bighorn River, or the Bighorn River, not the Little. This site is it's plains, not Dinwoody. There are humans here. They holding bows, so we know that they were making it from the late prehistoric onward. There are lots of bears here, full bears like this, lots of bear paws. In addition, it's really well known for its shield figures, and they have a lot of shield figures. Now, a while back when Julie Francis and Larry Lohndorf were doing their big dating project in Western Wyoming, they did date one shield from this site, and that was an outline peck shield dated to AD 1200. AD 1200 is pretty early for shield-bearing warriors. The oldest known shield-bearing warrior coming into the state is AD 1100. And then they extend, of course, all the way up through the horse period. But unlike the V-necked figures, which were coming from the north, the shield-bearing warriors were probably coming from the Great Basin and moving in. So that's why the earliest ones are going to be in southwestern Wyoming, then moving up through the basin, and then farther up north on the plains. Now, this site has 10 of these big holes like this. These holes were created by Harold McCracken and his crew. He was the director of the Buffalo Bill Museum at the time. These were done in 1962. He used wood drills, dynamite, and winch trucks to get these big blocks out of there. What was mainly on those blocks were shield-bearing warriors, and he was taking them out because he wanted to put them in the museum as an exhibit. However, they never got to that point. They were taken out, they were put in storage, then pretty much forgotten about until a few years back. And Bonnie Lawrence Smith, who happened to be working at the Bighorn Museum at that time, decided to go on a quest to find them. Well, she found them exactly where McCracken had left them, in storage Quonset. However, in the ensuing years, they have not really fared all that well. One of them was in pretty good condition, and it actually was moved over to the museum and is on display there right away. One of them was in such a deteriorated condition, they couldn't do anything with it. 8 of them were felt to be in pretty good condition, but they needed some stabilization and all before they could be put on display. So those were shipped to Laramie to the repository, where they are now undergoing some conservation, and also they're being recorded in detail there before they will go back up to the museum. Needless to say, that is not a way to display rock art. This site's in Yellowstone. It's had a long history of people knowing about it too, and it's had a lot of controversy associated with it. Although why, I don't know. Originally, people thought, well, it's historic. And for some reason, then they just wrote it off. And we're thinking, historic, prehistoric, what difference does it make? You know, it seems like it's a site that's worth keeping. There are 2 circular figures right here, and people thought they were historic because they thought they were wagon wheels. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because there are quite a few wagon wheels in rock art, and almost all of them have decorations that are somewhat different from that. And in addition, every wagon wheel we know of is connected to a wagon. These do not have a wagon. These look like shield figures, and they look like they have shield designs on them. These designs we can find in other rock art shields. Plus, they're by themselves, and shield figures often occur by themselves without any associated warrior. Now, a few years back, we joined with Elaine Hale, who's right here. She was the one of the park archaeologists at the time, and we did a paper on it for the Rocky Mountain Conference. Our speculation was that it was done by Native Americans who were using Yellowstone. They are really well worn, so they look like they have considerable antiquity. These are located in an old geyser basin, but they are off limits to the public, and you sure don't want to go out there without a Park Service employee who is dressed like a Park Service employee, because even with that, you have security out there right away trying to find out what you're doing out there. Okay, now we're on to the Dinwoody area. Although the Legend Rock site is featured prominently in the exhibit, I wanted to show it because it is one of the best dated sites in the state. Again, Larry Lohendorf and Julie Francis did a lot of work to get dates for this site. One of the problems with trying to find good figures to date at this site is that a lot of it was chalked. And in the past, people used to chalk rock art in order to take pictures of it. Well, we don't need that today. We have digital cameras, all sorts of other types of specialty cameras. We have lots of computer programs that will bring out rock art. We don't need to chalk. Plus, chalking contaminates the rock art for any dates. So one of the panels that they did a lot of dating on is this one right here. Now this looks from this picture like it's not that big a deal. You go up there, maybe stand on that thing, get a good straight on view of that panel. Not so. It's almost impossible to get a straight on view, which is why I borrowed Julie's shot of this panel from the Dinwoody Dissected book, because she actually had a picture of it where somebody took a pole up there and got a straight on view. They had four dates from this panel: this outlined animal, a handprint here, and this human. All 3 of those dated to the Paleo-Indian period. This human, I think I pointed to the wrong place there. And this bighorn sheep, he dated to the Archaic period. So you can see that these figures were placed on here over a long period of time. This was obviously a very important part of this site for many generations, and probably more than one cultural unit. Now, as I say, this goes from Paleo-Indian all the way down to a recent figures at Legend Rock, and I wanted to show you the rabbit because so many people go here, they're so interested in this rabbit. They were able to find a place to get a sample off of this rabbit that wasn't contaminated with chalk, and they got a date of about 350 years ago. This is Boysen Reservoir area. All of these figures are underwater today. This is the only one that's not. We have some pictures of it today in the exhibit. This one didn't get inundated because it's at the upper end of the reservoir and it's on a really high outcropping, so the reservoir never gets that high. The River Basin Surveys did a lot of work here. They did excavations as well as recording rock art. And even though they chalked all of these figures, you have to remember they were taking black and white film in the 1950s. They didn't have any of the technology we have today for cameras and computer enhancements. They also didn't know that in 50 plus years, people are going to be able to date rock art, which in the case of these sites doesn't really make any difference since they're all underwater. There's some great Dinwoody figures though all along that reservoir. And then I thought I'll bring in the Dinwoody type site. We do have quite a few pictures of it in the exhibit also. The main panels are right along here. All of these large interior lined, mostly owls and other birds, and then humans occur along this high panel, which overlooks Dinwoody Lake. This is a pretty steep climb from here, where the bottom is, where the sign is telling us don't disturb the rock art, up here to the fence, which keeps you off the rock art. The fence has done a good job of keeping people off, but it has not done a good job of keeping high-powered rifles off, because you can see they've been shot at from several angles. Now, most people visit this site during the summer because it's easy to drive in here, but we were there one winter, and John and our son Brian were sitting up here by the fence overlooking Dinwoody Lake, which was frozen and sort of trying to melt and cracking and making a lot of noise. And that noise comes back and echoes off this back wall, makes it sound like those figures are talking. So you can see why this was selected for a sacred rock art site. West of Dinwoody are Torrey, Ring, and Trail Lakes. These three lakes are together. There is a lot of Dinwoody style rock art here. This is an area of private and public land, but it's pretty well marked. So if you go along here, you can see a lot of Dinwoody style rock art and stay completely on public land. Now the rock art is not that far from the road. However, the caveat is the minute you leave the road, it's a steep slope all the way up. All of these figures are way up the hillside. However, after that steep climb, you really are rewarded with some great looking Dinwoody figures. There are some down closer to the road, but they're not as impressive. Now, about 30 years ago, a lady decided that a lot of these figures were being invaded by lichen. So she undertook this project to get rid of the lichen. And here's one of the figures that she tried this on. She took bleach and a scrub brush, and of course, all that it resulted in was damaging the rock art. And in addition, the lichen came back. Today, there are ways of removing lichen off of rock art where it won't come back and it's non-disturbing, but it's not bleach and a scrub brush. Okay, I'm going to end with a couple of sites that are just outside of Casper. The first one is probably one that you've all been to, Castle Garden, the premier rock art site in central Wyoming. The one thing that's pretty interesting about it, it's 30 miles from Castle Garden to the nearest Dinwoody site. But Castle Gardens is a plains style rock art, no Dinwoody, even though it's in such close proximity. And Castle Garden is known for its shield figures. So well known for its shield figures that there is a Castle Garden shield style. And if you find a shield figure elsewhere that has been made with this method where you smooth out the rock, then you incise your shield design, and then you paint it if you want to. That is a Castle Garden shield style. This is one of the best preserved, still seeable shields at the site. However, it is not on the established trails. It is off this on a side canyon, and it is well protected. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the nice colors still there. But you can bet that most of the shields at the time that they were made were more similar to this than they are this central area here. This is the main shield panel here. It is fenced in, so you can still see it readily today. Lots of different shield designs, but you can see that there are these splotches on some of these. Those came from somebody trying to record them by doing over that? Latex. Yeah, latex mold. So, thank you. Just escaped me for a minute there. Latex mold making to record shields was a popular way of doing it in the past. And you can see why it's not used anymore, because not only does it leave residue behind, but it also contaminates shields for direct dating. Then this one I wanted to show you. It's also in the exhibit here. And the reason I want to point it out is it's a shield design that occurs all across the plains. We've seen it as far north as central eastern Montana, where it occurs at the Bear Gulch site, and it's identical wherever you see it on the northern plains. It has, the name of the shield is Bear Comes Out. This and groove here in the center is considered the bear's den, and then these are the bears emerging from the den. Shield designs were traded and bought between tribes, and evidently this one was very powerful since it occurs in so many different areas. And then I want to end with this site. We do have it featured prominently in the display, also in the exhibit. This is the Armento pictographs, and it has 2 armored horses. This is what the armored horses looked like when John and I first arrived at the site. This site was brought to the attention of the archaeological community in 1984 by an oil field employee who was working on building this well pad, which is right next to the site. He saw it, and he took a picture of the armored horses and sent it to the SHPO and the BLM. Now, why this was not subject to a survey in 1984, no one can figure out, because surveys were being done since the late 70s routinely on federal wells, but somehow or another this one got overlooked. And we would probably never known about these armored horses had that well field employee not sent them in. Well, then 16 years passed, and Chris Arthur was then the BLM archaeologist in Casper, and he brought it to John and my attention. He said, "You guys are interested in rock art. Would you go out there and look at this site and sort of assess the condition of it for us?" So we did, and we went out there, and one of the things that was happening to this site is this well pad by then was no longer producing, but the well pad hadn't been rehabilitated. It was just sitting there, and wind was coming across there and sandblasting that site. So we joined with Kaiser to write an article on the condition of it and the impact that it was getting from the sandblasting. And shortly after that, the BLM came out and required the well pad to be rehabilitated. If you go out there today, this is all plowed up. These things are all gone. It's back to its natural contours. Well, then in 2021, somebody from the BLM went out there, and this, you can see right here, the front of this whole horse has fallen off. They thought it was human vandalism. So they asked us to go out again. We went out to look at it, and unfortunately, it's just naturally deteriorating. This outcropping is made of sheets of sandstone, and what's happening with them is they are getting water between them, freezes, thaws, and they pop right out. So soon there won't be anything left of this, which is too bad, because there are only about 20 known armored horses on the plains. And a couple of years back, we joined with Kaiser to write about the armored horses in the Northwestern Plains. It is one rock art figure that really tells us a lot about horse use in this region, because there is only one written record that any of us know about that even mentions native horse armor. It's based on Spanish armor, but the armor itself is made out of antelope skins. And the one reference to it is by Clark. While he was on the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1805, he saw a Shoshone with native armor. This Shoshone was on a horse west of Yellowstone on what is today about the Montana-Idaho state line, race line. And he did a pretty detailed description of that armor. So unfortunately, between natural deterioration and human impacts, we're losing a lot of rock art. So we're lucky with the sites that we still have left here to study and to enjoy. And I hope you all enjoy the rock art exhibit. Thank you.
So Mavis, what would you recommend as a reference book that might encompass all the various styles and ages? That would just be, if you were going to get one for your shelf to be a good overview, what would you suggest?
Oh, they're really, the only book out there that's an overview of any sort is already 20 years old, and that's Jim Kaiser and Michael Plassen's Rock Art of the Plains. And it's really not Rock Art of the Whole Plains. Their publisher made them use that title. It actually only deals with the Northwestern Plains. And like I say, it's 20 years old, so there have been a lot of changes since then. Julian and Larry's book on the Bighorn Basin is great, but it's very much centered on Dinwoody. That was their purpose and their focus. It also is getting old at this point. So much has happened, you know, in the intervening years. Really, the best way is to look through the Wyoming Archaeologists, the Archaeology in Montana. Both of those two for our area will have probably the most up-to-date information on rock art.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mavis Greer, and thank you for everyone coming out. Thank you to the Wyoming Archaeological Society, especially the Pumpkin Beach chapter, along with Fort Casper for making the rock art exhibit possible. The rock art exhibit will be up until June 3rd, which June 3rd is also World Atlatl Day, so you can come back with your kids and grandkids and learn how to throw some atlatls at some pronghorn archery targets. And then September 16th is our archaeological fair. And again, thank you for everybody for coming out.